I would like to welcome you all to our second Tizard Centre this year, and it's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Precious Sango today. As Precious has been with us in the Tizard Centre for quite a few years now. Precious did her undergraduate degree in psychology here in the University of Kent, and lucky for us, the field of intellectual and developmental disabilities won her over. And she ended up doing a master's degree in intellectual and developmental disabilities with us in the Tizard Centre. And you know what happens once you are in the Tizard Centre, it's really hard to get out. So she continued doing a PhD with us, and this is part of what she will be presenting today. If now you ask people around Tizard about Precious, I will guarantee you what they will all give you the same response. So the first thing they will say is what a lovely and nice person Precious is. And the second thing they will say is that how can she fit it all in? Seriously. Precious has quite a reputation among the PhD students, as she managed to finish her PhD within 3 years. And people that have PhDs within this field will know how difficult this is. And but she also managed to have a wedding and give birth to 2 lovely boys during this period. So now you can understand why they call her the Wonder Woman. Precious is very passionate about her research, and I will never forget the last YASID conference we attended together in Vienna. At that time, we shared a room, and Precious was heavily pregnant with her first baby, but very determined to communicate her findings, to present her research, and even do some networking. As for me, I was just terrified that she will be in labour any minute. But of course, nothing would stop Precious. So after Vienna, she went to Italy with Rachel to talk about research with the University of Verona. Currently, Precious is working as a research assistant in the psychology department of Christ Church University. And she has also helped to set up the charity Books to Africa, which is a really important thing for her and her husband. And all these accomplishments that she's done all these years, just quite an accomplishment there. I'm not going to keep you any much longer, as we all want to hear Precious to talk to us about her research titled Spirituality in People with Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities, and comparing the significance of spirituality in faith and non-faith-based care services. So over to you, Precious.
Thanks, baby. That's an interesting introduction. Wonder Woman. I'm not really a Wonder Woman, but thank you, Tizard. Just to start off, this presentation will be on my thesis, but I'm just going to be presenting some of the findings based on 2 papers that were submitted recently. So the topic, a bit long, is basically spirituality and people with learning disabilities or intellectual disabilities, but I might often use learning disabilities. So spirituality, what is spirituality and religion? I mean, spirituality is often used to mean religion, especially in academia, because people don't differentiate between the terms. But many authors argue that there is a difference in definition. So spirituality is often associated with the personal subjective experience, so having a relationship with a supernatural power or the divine, that which is beyond the self. For example, you could say spirit is a concrete noun and spirituality is an abstract noun. So you could say spirituality is the way in which we live with the spirit. I know it can be a bit complicated because I can see some people looking at me like, what is she on about? But you can ask me questions at the end, yeah? So just follow me. So religion, some people tend to say that religion is to do with social entities, so organizations. It requires membership, so obviously it's characterized by non-spiritual aims, but it can also be characterized by spiritual aims as well. And obviously it has now been narrowed down to traditional systems of beliefs like Christianity, Judaism, Islam, and so on. Just keep in mind that these are different definitions of spirituality. Some people tend to say that some people use religion to refer to what they mean as spiritual. But obviously that was a difficult I kind of found when I was doing my thesis. So I kind of did a literature search, and based on the literature in as to what people were using to define spirituality and religion, I came up with a multidimensional definition of spirituality. And this is it. So according to this definition, spirituality is the belief in the supernatural. Just bear in mind that this is based on all what the literature has been saying, so it's like putting the common themes together. So the main one is that spirituality is having a belief in the supernatural, in something bigger than the self. And there are three main dimensions to this, to spirituality, which are mainly used to define it, and is often universally agreed upon to be part of the definition of spirituality. One of them is transcendence. So obviously, transcending beyond the self, the belief in God and something bigger than you. There's the connection and relationship aspect, which is, you know, relationship with self, relationship with others, relationship with nature, environment. And then there's the meaning and purpose, which is the aspect where people strive to get meaning for things that happen to them in life, or just seeking answers for everyday situations. Going further, these are some of the references if you're interested in that. Going further, these aspects of spirituality can often be rooted in what I call the religious spirituality, which can be defined as the social practice or the social experience of one's belief in the supernatural. You know, for example, going to church, praying, worshipping, and things like that. And then there's the other aspect, which is non-religious spirituality, which is, you believe in something, but you don't necessarily practice it in any way. Okay. So this is the definition, the multidimensional definition of spirituality that I worked with. So now, why study spirituality? Well, recently there has been, some interest in the study of spirituality, religion, and health, especially. And most studies have mainly found that spirituality and religion have health benefits, and they can contribute to people's quality of life. They've also shown that spirituality and religion can help people with coping with everyday life stresses, losing beloved ones or coping with a mental illness. Self-esteem, people have been shown to, spirituality have been shown to help people to cope with self-esteem issues and improve mental health conditions again, and social support. I mean, obviously, the issue that I found was that there wasn't many empirical work on people with learning disabilities, because most of this population they either had AIDS, cancer, or older population, but there wasn't really much on people with learning disabilities. And obviously, these aspects of quality of life is very important to people with learning disabilities, but obviously there wasn't much research in that area. And again, there was little policy attention, empirical research, and practice in this area. So what we did was, we did a systematic review, which we submitted for TLDR. And what we did was we looked at government policies, so acts, green papers, white papers. We looked at them to see if there was any mention and what context they mentioned spiritual care, spirituality, religion in relation to the care of people with learning disabilities. And out of the 43 papers, we found only 6 of these were relevant. And obviously, we analyzed them thematically, and the context in which there was a mention of spirituality and religion was in the context of need, just briefly saying that people with learning disability, they need to have a spiritual support, for example. The context of human rights, obviously the Human Rights Act, in the context of discrimination and equality, and in the context of caring for people, for example. Obviously, this kind of motivated me further to do the research, and I did another systematic review. This was on spirituality, religion, and people with intellectual disabilities. So I set out to look for empirical work, because there's a lot of autobiographical and just literature, theories, philosophical paper on people with learning disabilities is important. Yes, it is important, but there isn't really many on empirical work out there. So out of the papers that were found, only 5 actually were relevant, and they were relevant in the context of participation. So obviously, we found that people with learning disabilities enjoy taking part in religious and spiritual activities, according to these 5 papers. And we also found that there were barriers to spiritual and religious care. So there were issues, why people didn't take part in these activities. For example, understanding, communication issues, or the service not being aware of how to cater to such needs. And some of the research gaps that we identified was, in most of these studies, there wasn't really a comparison group. So they were mainly just in sort of pilot study, but very small scale studies on people with learning disabilities and spiritual care. And there wasn't anything on faith-based services either, and there wasn't any mixed method studies that among the 5 studies that I included. There wasn't much on how learning disability support staff cared or supported these individuals in relation to spiritual care. So what we did, the thesis overall, the thesis aimed to explore the importance of spirituality in relation to the quality of life of people with learning disabilities in faith-based and non-faith-based services, and to investigate how faith-based and non-faith-based care staff provided spiritual support, obviously acknowledging that non-faith-based service may provide this indirectly or directly. So 3 research questions guided the thesis, and these were: how does spirituality relate to the care provided in both faith and non-faith-based care services for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities? And in what ways do people with intellectual disabilities understand the spiritual and the religious? And does spiritual or religious support make a difference to the life of people with learning disabilities in terms of their quality of life, self-esteem, and social networks? So obviously these methods were used for service user participants. Ethnographic methods such as document content analysis, participant observation, and open-ended voice-recorded interviews were used. For the quantitative aspect, we also used adaptive behavior scale. We used the spiritual belief inventory, the quality of life scale, adaptive self-esteem scale, and the social network guide. Obviously, I'm not going to be reporting on all of this, but there's a lot more detail on my thesis anyway, if you're interested. But for the staff, what we did is we used spiritual care competence scale and spiritual care perspective scale. So these measured staff's self-report of their competence in relation to spiritual care, and staff perspective, so what staff thought about people's spirituality and how they thought about providing spiritual support. Obviously, the reason why we use mixed method is just to get a more the insider perspective. It's not most of the studies that I found in the systematic review were mainly either quantitative or qualitative, and obviously it's important to get the insider's perspective, especially when you're talking about a subject such as spirituality. And the validity, you might question the validity in terms, but obviously these were accounted for through the data collection process, because we took certain measures. Well, I took certain measures, for example, recording the interviews when I was doing data analysis, making sure I stayed close to what participants were saying. There were also other measures in terms of the observation, how I recorded my fieldwork notes as well. Right, so the setting, the faith-based, I called it Adam's House, just for confidentiality issues, but Adam's House and Green Leaves is the other non-faith-based service, and they're both in the southeast of England. And faith-based, the main care philosophy is around sharing, relationships, simplicity, and supports individuals to explore their spiritual lives, but also to explore other lives, other areas of their life and care. It consisted of 9, well at the time, I'm not sure about now, but at the time of the research, it consisted of 9 supported living houses, operating a 24-hour care service with volunteers paid staff who some lived in the residence. They called them live-in, and then they had leave-out assistants as well who helped individuals when necessary. Staff were from very different backgrounds. Greenleaf's care philosophy was based on Valuing People 2011, which focuses on meeting the social physical needs of residents, person-centered plan, encouraging individuals' independence, their rights, and including them in the society. They also operated a 24-hour shift system. They didn't have live-in assistants, but it was mainly on leave-out assistants, and they actually are based in the same area, some of their residences. So for this presentation, I'm going to be presenting findings that we've used to to publish 2 papers. So the first paper is going to focus on spiritual care provision, so mainly focused on staff in these care services. So staff demographics, so there were about 42 staff. I mean, the aim was to recruit more, but I'll talk about this in the end in terms of the issues encountered. But in total, there were 42 staff, and there were obviously more female participants than male participants. And the mean age obviously was from 18 to 53 years old, and most of them have worked in their services for over 5 years, 1 year, more than 2 years, let's say, but some over 5 years as well. So they really know the service as well and the service users. So some of the findings on the scale, so the spiritual care perspective scale and the spiritual care competence scale. So some of the questions included staff spiritual religious background, and as you can see, the blue line is Adam's house, and there were more Christians in Adam's house than in Greenleaf's, and there were a lot of people indicated to be other. So when they said other, most of them referred to other types of spirituality. Some of them said, I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious. So again, they fall into that category of spiritual but not religious. So, and obviously the same thing, there were some in Adam's house as well that indicated that they were spiritual and not religious. But most of them in Adam's house said they were Christian, so they were religious and spiritual, while most in Adam's house, in Greenleaf's, also said that they were Christian. But something to note is that some people, they said they were Christians, but they didn't necessarily believe in anything. They just said, I'm a Christian. Why? Because my mom grew up in a Catholic family and we all go to church. So the religion is not really based on the fact that they believe. So in a way, it can be quite hard to categorize this kind of people, but I guess you can put them in the category of spiritual but not religious, or in the religious category alone. So the other point, so spiritual background. So this one was in relation to both sexes. As you can see, there were significant differences in relation to spiritual care. So on spirituality, for example, related to their beliefs, do they practice it, and religious background, influence of belief. So questions as, does your spirituality influence your daily life? Life question, do you ask yourself what's the meaning of life, what's the meaning of death, things like that. And do people with learning disability influence your spirituality? Obviously, Adam's house, there was a significant difference in terms of Adam's house. Staff actually were more influenced, for example, by service users. Their belief influenced their care role and their daily lives more than Greenleaf staff. So, for example, some of the quotes to just indicate that, for example, one says, so as challenging as it is, which is the job, every day you still have to ask guidance from God. So you ask to just help you through this day, to do what you can. So I tend to say these sorts of things whenever I go to work. I think it's one of the things that makes me look forward to another day. He is the one leading you, guiding you. I believe without him, we would not be able to do anything in our daily life. So obviously that's showing someone who has a religious spirituality sort of belief, whose spirituality is influencing their daily life and the way they care for service users. And obviously in Greenleaf's, the staff is saying, my work is not influenced by my belief system or spirituality. I follow a code of practice and a code of conduct and have boundaries here. Obviously this person is not guided by any spiritual belief, but what they believe in is important to them, the code of practice. But obviously further, when content analysis was done on the code of practice, there isn't really any mention of how to provide spiritual care for people with learning disabilities. There were also influence on service users. So obviously a lot of people from Adam's house, their people with learning disabilities influence their spirituality in the sense that it makes them question the meaning of life and purpose, while people from Greenleaf's, not really. It makes them more grateful. So the context in which people with learning disabilities influence their spirituality was in the context of sympathy, or like, I'm glad I had a baby, the baby was fine, things like that. And then staff attitudes. There wasn't any significant difference between the staff in Adam's house and Greenleaf's, because most of them, obviously, you have to have in mind that this is a self-report, so there wasn't significant difference, but as you will see later in the qualitative part, you could see some difference, especially when people were talking, they were given opportunities to elaborate more on their attitudes and perspective about spiritual care. Spiritual care and competence. So obviously this one had to do with, if staff felt that they were equipped, if they were competent enough to provide spiritual care, and if they have had experiences of providing spiritual care. And there wasn't actually much difference in both services, but in the qualitative aspect of the study, staff from Greenleaf in Adam's house gave more examples, more instances of providing spiritual care than staff from Greenleaf's. So obviously this kind of made me kind of want to question more, which you would see more detail in the qualitative part. Again, for example, one of them, the examples they gave, the ones from Adam's house. So it says every day before they have supper, they sing praise or they hold hands. I actually enjoy this part in Greenleaf's. Even if you're not a Christian or have any belief as such, it's quite intimate, like having supper. It was like you're having supper with your family, where you say grace and these things are not forced upon. The service uses request for this spiritual care anyway. They sing hymns. For example, in Greenleaf, staff mainly focus on the examples they gave about spiritual care experience was based on the service users going out to church and what they do at church. And obviously, as you can see in the second quote, the MC highlights that there are difficulties which kind of inhibit such care provision, which are, for example, sometimes 4 or 5 of them attend, but it depends on if staff are available to take them because it's a Sunday. For another staff from Adam's house gave example of pilgrimages which they do with service users, which is quite interesting because they talk about, obviously, you would then need to give them more support because you're walking 5 miles and you're singing together, but obviously it would require them to give them more of that support of spiritual care, either singing with them, praying along with them as well. Staff education. This was one of the main differences I found, Adam's house and Greenleaf's. So in Adam's house, most of the staff, so for example, over 50% of the staff indicated, so we asked them, the type of training they had. They indicated other training. So most of the training that were on the questionnaire related to higher education and skills in spiritual care, and then other. So most of them indicated other, and when they indicated other and given the choices to elaborate more, they were talking about formation. So as E said, formation is the word training that is used in Adam's house. So it's supposed to be the way we use the word to mean something holistic. It's not just about learning skills to do a job, but also learning by yourself, I think. There is things like health and safety and manual handling and fire safety and all of those kind of things. By law, we got to do. and there are things which we do and we are not necessarily legally obliged to do, which in my view are equally important. So spirituality, for example, is exploring people around the area of spirituality, and people learn civility. So they have this formation taking place, which incorporates an aspect of getting staff to, kind of know what spirituality, what do you think spirituality is, and also informing them and telling them, the aspects of spiritual lives that certain core members enjoy taking part in. For example, there are some service users that enjoy praying at certain times, so they're kind of familiar with that. So exploring that question, but in Greenleaf's, they didn't have that. Most of the Greenleaf staff mentioned things like, when you ask them, have you had any spiritual care training, some of them would say, yeah, sort of, other. And when you ask them deeper, what sort of training, some would talk about escape and brief and person-centered training, because they think it includes, the individual. So you have to think about the individual religion, the religion of the individual, respecting the religion of the individual. But the trainings don't actually tell them how to, or explore, take them through the area, the topic of spirituality in itself. So this was one of the main differences in both between both services. Some of this. So brief. Some of the Greenleaf staff was talking about brief and skip as the spiritual care training that they received. Qualitative findings. So the qualitative aspect was analyzed using thematic analysis, and three main themes derived from the data. So the first theme was community of value, which characterized Adam's house and included two categories: informalized care relationships, shared lives, and informalized care relationships. So the first one, shared lives, it's based on my observation, it's like care is submerged within this context, like a subculture, which is based on specific traditions. These traditions, you can say that they enable individuals to facilitate spiritual care as such. So for example, he was saying how they sit together, evening meal, they serve each other, they sit around on the table, they serve each other meals. It's not like the staff serving the service users and the service users being passive. It's all of them working together to prepare the meal and to eat the meal. Informalized care relationship is referred to from the observation and from the thematic analysis. There's sort of a mutual respect between staff and service users. Individuals are not considered as a burden, but they're seen as having a gift to offer within the community. I remember one interview I did, and someone was saying how, the way this person described a service user as someone who had a gift of welcoming, and she was telling me this example of when she first started, and she didn't really differentiate between staff and service users. It was actually the service users who were welcoming her to the community. So it's this they all have this relationship that seems informal, but at the same time they're providing care, but care which is not paid for in a way. It seemed very unconditional in a sense. They love each other, they care for these people without thinking of them as a burden or as clients. And the second theme, functional care, related to Greenleaf staff. I mean, obviously based on the care philosophy, of the person-centeredness, staff from Greenleaf focused on the physical, the physical care, giving them bath, medication, taking them to their social events and coming back. And they were focused on all these things, and some of them saw it as more important than spiritual care, especially when you don't have time to, cater to all other needs. So, for example, one person was saying just respecting what they want, hygiene, communication is key. So, because I was asking, what they think in terms of the role of spirituality, and they were just saying how the main thing is respecting what individuals think, their hygiene, their communication, basic living really. So they were telling me about what happens in the morning, the handover period and everything. And I actually had one who was saying how how they don't think individuals with learning disabilities have a spiritual need. And there was a difference in terms of the care staff provided when it comes to bereavement and grief, for example. So K in GL in Greenleaves was saying, I've got one who is going to his first funeral. He has basic understanding, but to him it's like, I'm just saying goodbye, aren't I? And I'm like, yeah, pretty much, you're just saying goodbye. So it kind of shows you the issue here in terms of training, that staff don't have the right training as to how to help individuals to deal with things that happen to them. And funny enough, the person that was going to the funeral, it was actually a Christian, so she could have used that to, I don't know, encourage him some sort, even if you don't believe or anything, just to give him some form of hope. But obviously, this was a difference I found. While in Lash, I mean, not everyone was a Christian, but even if you're not a Christian, they were able to use the individual beliefs or to help them to understand situations. So, for example, I remember a staff from Adam House who was saying how they had usually have opportunities to grieve. You know, they would leave them, create space for individuals to grieve, and you know, some people would ask for prayers and they would pray with them, even if, for example, staff don't believe in prayer, they would still respect that individual and pray with them. So that was also a difference. The third theme was very common to both services. So one of them was communication issues. Communication issues in Greenleaves and Adams House referred to service users. So they were saying how it was difficult sometimes to communicate with them, to find out what their needs were, you know, if they wanted to go to church or not. So sometimes staff were kind of improvising or kind of assumed that someone is happy where they are. I mean, I had someone in Adams House who was saying there's a lady that goes to church who seems really happy at church, but the woman doesn't communicate, but they assume that she's happy there. And then you have the situation in Greenleaves where they can't communicate, so you don't really make the effort to find out if they want to go to church or if they want extra support in that area. Shortage of staff, I mean, this was a major issue in terms of spiritual care that staff were talking about. They were saying how, for example, G from Adams, I was saying sometimes when things are going wrong, you have no assistance, for example. I think it's spiritual care is the first thing that gets cut. So when we're in shortage, when there isn't enough people, I mean, you don't really think about providing spiritual care or, you know, having, you know, a moment for people to, for example, pray or anything like that. And then another one was saying most of the time, because sometimes they're too busy to listen, sometimes they don't have enough carers, so they can't really provide all the care they would like. Again, in Greenleaves, there was the same thing, shortage of staff, and then, you know, staff not turning up at work because of illnesses. And another thing that a staff from Adams House was saying was that some staff, new staff, when they haven't gone through the training of formation, they find it hard to take service users to church because they don't know how to cope in such situations. So, a staff was actually saying how that was one of the issues. Another one was staff perception. So if you remember in the statistical findings, there was no difference in relation to staff attitude and perspectives in relation to spiritual care. But obviously, qualitative data showed otherwise. So, for example, Adams House staff was saying that to pray, you have to make yourself vulnerable. So this was their view, you know, their view related to vulnerability, fear. Some of them, you know, didn't want to seem that they're forcing religion on people, even though some service users are the one requesting for it. You know, some were scared of providing it, some were saying it can be stressful to prepare prayer, or you know, they don't trust what they say, for example, when they have to talk about prayers or talk about what they've read in the Bible. So there were different feelings, but at the end they were saying how they enjoyed it and how they actually get a lot of support within the community and they're not forced to do such tasks. But it was a bit different in Greenleaves, where most of them, for example, Bia was saying the reason why they don't provide it or why they don't think it's important is because they don't feel like they do have the mental capacity. So people learn to, they don't feel like they have the mental capacity to understand real beliefs. I mean, she thinks if they did, then there would be a lot more attention in that area. And another one from Greenleaf was saying personally how they don't think this group would say that, she wouldn't say that they have a spiritual need, which kind of justifies why they don't see it as important to provide such care. The second paper, finding from the second paper, is in relation to social network. I will just be focusing on social network of people with learning disabilities and spirituality. So there were 18 service users from Adams House and 18 from Greenleafs who took part, obviously, with various learning levels of ID condition, and age range was obviously 21 to 71 in Adams House and 23 to 67 in Greenleafs. The adaptive behavior scale, obviously there wasn't much difference. They were similar in the sense that there wasn't a significant difference between the groups in terms of their ability to care for themselves, communicate, in terms of their social skills and things like that. There wasn't much difference. So one of the quantitative findings for service users is the spiritual belief inventory. So the belief and practices scale measure things like, is religion important to you? What do you believe in something? Things like that. And there were a lot of difference between Greenleaf service users and Adams House service users, and also support from spiritual community. So this was measuring service user participants' view on if they get more support from their religious or spiritual communities, if they enjoy taking part in social and religious events, things like that. There were again more differences. And there were quite a lot of difference in the social networks of service users in Adams House and Greenleaf's house, where, as you can see, there was 78, an average 78 social networks for Adams House and 44 for Greenleaf's. And obviously the median is 69 and 43, and 44 for Greenleaf's service users. Going further, the areas of life, for example, focusing on the social network, as you can see, the green line is Greenleaf's. There were a lot of staff who formed part of their network members. So network members from Greenleaf's there were a lot of paid staff, and again, obviously, the same thing for. As you can see, for Adams House, it was quite close, social acquaintances and staff. So a lot of people were, were mentioning people that they've met. So social acquaintances from community gatherings, for example, which is an event that Adams House usually hosts. Sometimes they have big events where they meet with other communities across the UK. So people were mentioning individuals, putting individuals within the category of social acquaintances. Obviously, compared to Greenleaf's, they didn't have a lot of social acquaintances. And just to show it a bit more clearly, you can see it here. So they had a lot of staff who were staying with them in the house, or obviously who cared for them. Social acquaintances was the second most number of social network members, and people from church was the third on the social network area of life. So obviously, as you can see, personal and household support, so functional behaviors in terms of personal, washing, cooking, obviously a lot of staff helped individuals in those areas, but as you can see, the material support, so gifts, was more from a lot more network members of Adams House. And again, this is obviously, if I didn't do a qualitative study, I wouldn't know this, but I found out that the reason why this was the case was because there was more opportunities in Adams House to give gifts. So for example, they celebrated people's birthdays, they would give them gifts and stuff, so they had more opportunities for that. Interactional behavior, so helping them, they help you. There were more network members of Adams House who offered such support than Greenleaf's. Again, this kind of confirms the theme on okay. Sorry, brain block, but informalized spirit. the care, the second theme, basically, category, informalized care relationship in Adam's house. This kind of confirms it. They help them, they help you. So, but obviously, as you can see, for the green leaves, it was more of the other role. Staff were doing the job for them. For example, there were a lot of people doing cooking. They had cooking staff and all that. But in Adam's house, they helped each other. More people were saying how they usually help washing up or setting the table, things like that. Okay, and then I did a correlation. This was so I called it a correlation between the spiritual belief inventory and the SNG, social network. This was a non-parametric one, and there was a correlation which, as you can see there, which seems to indicate that people from Adam's house may have indicated more belief system and more support, and those who did that seem to have reported more social network members, which kind of leads me to probably, to assume that spirituality kind of has an importance in relation to people's social network, because obviously the more individuals were kind of accessing social clubs and social gatherings, which often, had some aspect of spirituality, and also people were being supported to go to church. People were accessing more social network and having opportunities to expand their social networks in a way. So that could justify the reason why they had more social network. Qualitative findings. So there were 3 themes which were derived from qualitative findings of service users. And these themes further corroborate findings from the spiritual belief inventory scale, in the sense that it contextualizes it by, showing you how service users understood spirituality. So the first theme was in relation to perception of death. So some of them viewed death or the deceased as being asleep. So someone was saying how a service user doesn't know that if you talk about his brother, he thinks his brother is sleeping. And others understood it in terms of going to heaven. For example, Katia was saying, these are fake, these are pseudonyms, so they're not real names. So Katia was saying how her mom is there, her mom is going to heaven, and she's going to be by herself. But later on in the interview, she was saying how her mom will be with her brother-in-law, who's also in heaven. So that kind of gave her a bit of hope as well. And Jethro also reported, this Jethro is from Greenleaves, he reported how his grandfather is up there in heaven, and this was the reason why praying, for example, was important to him, because he could talk to his grandfather in heaven. The second thing, importance of prayer. So this was also common to both service users in Adam's house and service users in Greenleaf's house. I mean, it's quite detailed, but it's quite important in the sense that most of the things that were coming out was how spirituality played a role in their lives in relation to healing. One of them was talking about how she believes that she was healed from epilepsy by God, as you can read in the long quote. And one of them was, they saw spirituality and prayer as, healing. For example, praying for someone who wasn't well because they believed that that can help them get better. Others were in terms of, friendship. For example, one was talking about the confidence that prayer gave them, to make friends. So as you can see there, one was saying how it guided them. So Camille was saying, Jesus listens to me. I just talk to him. If I talk to Jesus in the heart, he responds back. Has it helped you in any situations? Like, yeah, plenty. So what examples? Like, I had a friend who didn't want to be friends with me, and I asked Jesus, could he help me to be friends with this person? And I kept asking, and it took a while, but yeah, so basically it happened. So this is an example of where, their belief in Jesus helped them to make friends. And the importance of prayer was also noted in the context of mental health, such as Camille, obviously, again, confidence in herself, believing in herself more. And Micah obviously was saying how they prayed to their mom who was dead, so they believed in that, and how so it kind of helped them to connect with the deceased in a way, stay connected and continue this relationship that they have. So these are some of the roles that spirituality played in their lives. The third and final theme was in relation to sophisticated expression of beliefs. This was common to both service, but it seemed like Adam's house service users had the language to communicate this more than Greenleaf staff. And the sophisticated example is from Camille, who had this understanding, like complex doctrinal understanding of God as Jesus and God as one. As you can see, they were saying how it's hard to say because, and then they were saying how you have to believe Jesus is God. You can't say no, Jesus is one man, God is another. It doesn't work like that. Other people think it works like that, but I don't. I believe Jesus is God and God is always there. Whatever you do, God is always there, always. And if I go to college or do my laundry or cleaning my room or eating, God's there, God follows you. And in fact, God is in your heart and everywhere and nice. So these were the beliefs. This kind of contextualizes the spiritual belief inventory to show you that these individuals actually have an understanding of what they're talking about. So summary and recommendations. So the findings obviously presented do indicate that there's a need for practical changes within the care service for people with intellectual disabilities. If there could be an introduction of spiritual care training in maybe in person-centered, care plans, for example, when they do such training, maybe they could include training on how to support individual spirituality and the importance of spirituality in relation to quality of life, especially social network of people, and how care providers can, how care provision of this spiritual support can differ depending on the service you find yourself living in. Obviously, staff care services and care organizations can work together with chaplains or church representatives to kind of work around this area. I remember in Greenleaf there was a service users who had, I guess I would call it a spiritual crisis. I mean, she was still dealing with that, she was angry with God, but she doesn't have anyone to talk about it. So it would be interesting and quite good for their mental health to have someone to talk to about these things. And the use of current findings, especially in the area of bereavement and the meaning of death, could be used to enhance spirituality measures in the area of intellectual and developmental disabilities. Some of the limitations, obviously, it could be, I only looked at a Christian faith base. I'm not sure if it's a limitation as such, but because I only looked at it as a case of a Christian. So following on, it would be good to look at non-Christian faiths, like Hindu or Islam or Judaism. And again, it could be argued that my spiritual background, being a Christian, may have biased how the study was conducted and how the data was analyzed. But I don't think that was the case because I followed appropriate measures, to make sure it didn't happen. For example, the interviews were recorded and, I transcribed them verbatim. And I tried to stay close to the data when I was in my analysis with a lot of points. And my supervisor also had a look at some of the transcripts, and we discussed the themes at the end when she came up with our themes. And there wasn't many conflicting themes that we came up with. That's all. Thank you. Sorry, I took a bit long.
Thank you. Any questions for Precious?
Hi.